On July 15th, 1965, the Mariner 4 probe made its closest approach to Mars and took the very first picture of another planet from space. When those photos were sent back to Earth, they caused a massive stir because they showed a dead world with a thin atmosphere filled with craters and totally desolate and barren. This was the exact opposite of what people had imagined Mars to be for centuries. Before that, it was widely believed that the Martian surface had extensive vegetation and river channels. An astronomer named Lowell even suggested that the channels weren't natural formations, but instead were artificial canals dug by someone. The implication was that intelligent beings, much like us, lived on Mars. But the pictures from Mariner 4 completely crushed that whole fantasy. No plants, no man-made canals, just a cruel, harsh environment. More probes landed on Mars later, and our understanding of the planet became much clearer. It was a world with an atmosphere that was only 1% as thick as Earth's, temperatures that dropped to 133 degrees Celsius, and no magnetic field to protect it. This meant solar wind and cosmic rays could hit the surface without any resistance. Given these extremely harsh conditions, the idea that life couldn't exist on Mars gained widespread acceptance, and for a while, it was the scientific consensus. However, that consensus was fundamentally shaken in 1996. It all started with a science project called ANSMET. ANSMET stands for the Antarctic Search for Meteorites Program, and, as the name suggests, its goal is to find meteorites in Antarctica. Since 1976, the ANSMET project has collected and identified over 20,000 meteorite samples. These samples are crucial for scientists who study the composition of extraterrestrial matter, and they've greatly expanded our knowledge of the solar system's formation conditions and necessary materials. On December 27, 1984, an American meteorite hunting team from the ANSMET project found a roughly 2 kilodollar meteorite in the Allen Hills region of Antarctica, which was given the designation Allen Hills 84001. Since a lot of other meteorites were found around the same time that seemed more valuable for research, 84001 was largely ignored. It sat quietly for 10 years in the meteorite lab at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Then, in 1994, 84001 was finally examined for the first time, and that changed everything for it. Scientists were astonished to learn that the rock was not from a shattered asteroid, as they first thought, but actually from Mars. The proof was convincing. Many factors cause meteorites to have tiny gas bubbles trapped inside. These bubbles are like the meteorite's ID card, holding clues to its origin. The composition of the gas bubbles inside 84001 perfectly matched the atmospheric sample collected by the Viking 1 probe when it landed on Mars in 1976. Now, finding a Martian meteorite wasn't a huge discovery in itself, as dozens had been found before. However, 84001 was the oldest one, estimated to be 4.5 billion years old. By using radiometric dating and various complex physics analyses, scientists pieced together its history. About 17 million years ago, it was ejected from Mars and began its journey through space until Earth's gravity captured it 13,000 years ago. It fell in Antarctica, where it was finally found by humans. 84001's journey was certainly incredible, but the even more incredible part came later. In 1996, David McKay, NASA's chief astrobiologist, published a mind-blowing article in Science magazine. He claimed that his team had found evidence inside 84001 that could only be explained by life processes. This suggested that life might have existed on Mars as far back as 4.5 billion years ago. To top it off, they also released a photograph. It was a high-resolution electron microscope image of the meteorite's interior. The chain-like structure in the center, about 20 to 100 nanometers wide, was suspected to be a fossilized nanobacterium. The news caused a global sensation. Even President Bill Clinton gave a formal televised statement to mark the historical moment. There's a famous quote in science: "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." Claiming that 84001 contained signs of past life was certainly an extraordinary claim. So what extraordinary evidence did McKay's team present? First, they found an organic compound called polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs, inside 84001, and they ruled out the possibility that it was Earth contamination. On Earth, this type of organic compound is generally associated with decaying organisms and fossils. Next, along the edges of the carbonate minerals in 84001, they found neatly aligned magnetite, which are microcrystals of iron oxide, Fe3O4. Based on the size, shape, and distinct details of these crystals, they appeared virtually identical to the microcrystals produced by Earth bacteria that can process magnetite. The third, and most visual piece of evidence, was the photograph of the suspected bacterial fossil. Any of these pieces of evidence alone would have been unconvincing, but when you put them all together, explaining them with Martian microorganisms was the simplest and required the fewest assumptions. Still, because we have so few reference samples, this idea is still debated today with no definitive conclusion, but a string of recent discoveries on Mars seems to back up this view. For example, the Curiosity rover found large amounts of organic compounds on the Martian surface, and complex organic molecules exist in the Gale crater, and so on. While this is not proof of Martian life, it does confirm that the basic building blocks of life are there, which significantly increases the chance that Earth-like life once existed on Mars. With that in mind, let's look at one photograph. You've probably seen this before. The Viking 1 probe took it on July 25th, 1976, while flying over the Cydonia region of Mars. The structure in the middle that looks like a human face is about 3 kilometers long and 1.5 kilometers wide. NASA explained this feature as an optical illusion caused by light and shadow. But here's the kicker. Viking 1 took another picture of Cydonia after orbiting Mars 35 times, and the face showed up again. If NASA's explanation is that the face is just a trick of light and shadow, then why did it still appear after both the time and the viewing angle had changed? This strange, hard-to-explain occurrence has led many people to suspect that NASA is hiding something. Mark Carlotto is a longtime image analysis expert with over 30 years in the field, and he's one of those skeptics. To find the truth, he decided to use his professional skills to analyze the unusual structure. First, he used digital elevation model, DEM, technology to process the black and white photo from Viking 1. By analyzing brightness differences to determine the structure's elevation, he then used that data to build a 3D model. Incredibly, the model looked extremely similar to a human face. No matter which direction the light came from, it always showed clear facial features. Of course, even if the structure really did look like a face, that wouldn't necessarily mean it was artificial. To address that question, Carlotto analyzed the structure to look for non-natural patterns. He used a method called fractal geometry, which analyzes a structure's self-similarity. The results showed that the face structure had very low self-similarity compared to the surrounding objects. This suggests it may not have been formed naturally. If Carlotto's conclusion is right, then the theory about anomalous radioactive materials on Mars might also be correct. The periodic table includes an element called xenon, Xe. Natural xenon is made up of its stable isotopes. In Earth's atmosphere, the ratio of these isotopes is pretty consistent, but on Mars it's the opposite. Its atmosphere has a high concentration of the isotope xenon 129. So why is that? Physicist Dr. John Brandenburg proposed a bold theory at the 2011 Lunar and Planetary Science Conference. Mars experienced a nuclear war. His reasoning is that xenon 129 is a byproduct of nuclear fission. Whenever a nuclear weapon detonates, it creates a huge amount of xenon 129. The concentration of xenon 129 in Earth's atmosphere has been increasing since 1945 because that's when humans developed nuclear technology. The comparison chart he included in his paper showed that before 1945, the Martian atmosphere had a xenon 129 content as high as 1600, while Earth's was only 600. But after 1945, Earth's atmospheric xenon 129 content started rising sharply, reaching roughly the same level as Mars. Brandenburg also noted something else. Martian meteorites found so far only contain trace amounts of radioactive elements. However, during the Mars rover missions, scientists found that the surface samples collected on Mars contained a lot of radioactive material. Typically, Martian meteorites that reach Earth are rocks, or soil from beneath the Martian surface, and those have low content. This suggests that radioactive elements are concentrated only on the Martian surface and in the atmosphere. Brandenburg believes the simplest and most logical explanation for this is a violent nuclear explosion on the surface of Mars. Using the radiation concentration map created by the Mars Odyssey spacecraft, he even pinpointed the explosion's location. It was in the Martian northern hemisphere, where two distinct spots had extremely high concentrations of radioactive material, equivalent to 1 million megaton hydrogen bombs. Since neither spot had a visible impact crater, he concluded they were airbursts, just like the atomic bombs detonated over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Even more astonishing, by analyzing the overall radiation levels on the Martian surface and the size of the two hotspots, Brandenburg estimated the approximate size of the nuclear weapons. They were about the size of the Empire State Building. That's terrifying. Can you imagine a 400-meter tall nuclear weapon falling from the sky? Isotope evidence also suggests this catastrophic event took place around 300 million years ago. So, putting all these theories together, we might be able to piece together some of the history of the red planet. Around 4.5 billion years ago, Mars was a warm, comfortable world with liquid water covering its surface where simple life first emerged. Over billions of years of evolution, intelligent life appeared. They built a civilization, developed technology, and looked to the stars, just like us. But 300 million years ago, it all suddenly ended. A nuclear war broke out. Powerful nuclear weapons wiped out the thriving Martian civilization and caused permanent, irreversible damage to the environment until it became the planet we see today. This is certainly a big leap, but there is one highly questionable part of this theory. We'll get to it in a minute. For a long time, many people have suspected that the Martian civilization might not have been totally destroyed, or that some survivors might still be hidden. In 1988, the Soviet Union launched the Phobos 2 probe to explore Mars and its two moons. On January 29, 1989, Phobos 2 arrived at Mars and entered orbit. Initially, the mission was a success. It took many photos of Mars and its moons until March 28th. That day, the Ground Control Center detected an oval object approaching Phobos 2 at high speed. Then nothing. The same day, the official Soviet news agency, TASS, announced that Phobos 2, after completing its orbits of Mars and its moon, had lost contact with Earth control and failed to check in as planned. March 29th, Phobos 2 was declared 99% permanently lost. Notice how they specifically said the satellite was lost, not just contact with it. On March 31st, the European news agency EFE broke a major story, reporting that before Phobos 2 lost contact, it had photographed an oval unidentified flying object, UFO, on the surface of Mars. Based on size estimation, this object was at least 20 kilometers long. This couldn't have been a camera glitch because two different cameras took the image using infrared technology. Control Center staff later disclosed that Phobos 2 had spun out of control, as if something had struck it. This is the second to last photo it sent back to Earth. The rectangular unidentified object in the photo is likely the actual source of that massive shadow. As for what it was, no one knows. According to Soviet Air Force Colonel Popovich, Soviet officials were also very interested. During the Malta summit in December 1989, Gorbachev even discussed the UFO with George H.W. Bush. Regardless of whether Mars had a civilization or if there are still hidden survivors today, it is fascinating how Mars represents war and slaughter across different cultures and religions. For instance, in ancient China, Mars was known as Yinghuo, fluorescent confusion. The saying goes, flickering fire brings great confusion. Its appearance was often associated with events like the death of an emperor, the removal of a prime minister, and various disasters or military conflicts. Of course, there's no evidence for those ideas. In ancient Indian astrology, Mars is also a malevolent star, representing the god of anger and symbolizing killing and death. In Greek mythology, Mars became the embodiment of bloodlust and carnage, Ares, the god of war. That's where the name Mars comes from. So why is the meaning of Mars so strikingly similar across different cultures and regions? Tying this back to the nuclear war theory, we could speculate that perhaps some survivors fled Mars for Earth many years ago. Their history, passed down over time, might have eventually morphed into the myths that so strongly connect Mars with war. Going back to the earlier theory about the Martian history, I mentioned that there was an unreasonable part to that conjecture. That is, a Martian civilization could be destroyed by nuclear weapons. But no matter how powerful nuclear weapons are, they couldn't turn Mars into a dead planet without an atmosphere and magnetic field. The same is true for humanity. Detonating all the nuclear weapons in the world would wipe out human civilization. But for Earth, it would just be a scratch. Only one thing can truly kill a planet: a cosmic-level catastrophe, like an asteroid impact. On Mars, there's a huge impact crater that's over 2,300 kilometers wide and more than 7,000 meters deep. That's about 12 times bigger than the Earth's largest crater, the Chicxulub crater. The Chicxulub crater caused Earth's fifth mass extinction, wiping out 75% of life at the time, including the dinosaurs. Imagine the effect on Mars when a crater 12 times its size was formed. This aligns with the current mainstream scientific view. The fundamental reason for Mars's decline was an asteroid impact. Considering the evidence on the Martian surface and what happened to Phobos 2, we can hypothesize that the asteroid impact must have happened before the nuclear war. But if that's the case, all life on Mars should have been completely extinguished. So why would a nuclear war happen later? The only explanation is that before the impact, the Martians had reached a Type 1 or higher level of civilization. They must have hidden deep underground, surviving the impact. Of course, these are just speculative ideas. The real truth will probably only be known when we finally land on Mars, and that day is hopefully coming soon. Finally, I want to leave you with this thought. If an intelligent civilization really did exist on Mars, then as their neighbors, their fate might be a preview of our own ending. Some researchers have suggested that intelligent civilizations have a self-destructive tendency. The more advanced the technology, the higher the chance of self-destruction. War, engineered viruses, powerful artificial intelligence, all of these could become the executioner that ends a civilization, and that may be the ultimate answer to the Fermi paradox.